Welcome back to Mr.Terror Tales, where the night is darker than any shadow and every family has its secrets. Christmas Eve's supposed to be a time for joy, for warmth, for love, but not for everyone. For some, the holiday is a reminder of what they've lost. For others, it's the night when something worse is found. Tonight's stories are filled with cold, with whispers, and with horrors that only emerge when we are alone. So sit back, but not too comfortably. This Christmas Eve, the terror creeps closer. Lucy had never been able to escape the house. It wasn't that she didn't want to. The mansion, isolated, standing like a fortress in the forest, was an oppressive reminder of everything her family had kept hidden. The old wood creaked under her every step, the wallpaper peeling from decades of neglect, and the air always smelled faintly of mildew and something far older. Christmas was no exception. Tonight she had planned for peace, a solitary evening to herself. The house was cold, the fire too small to warm the vast emptiness around her. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, its sound too sharp, like a warning. She had no family left to share this night with, not since they'd all passed under mysterious circumstances. And now, it was just her and the house, alone. The glow from the small fire in the hearth flickered in strange patterns across the walls. It almost seemed like the shadows were moving, swimming across the plaster, twisting and curling like they had lives of their own. Lucy shivered and drew her blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the oppressive atmosphere that wrapped itself around her like a blanket of dread. As the minutes dragged on, she heard it. The soft scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood. It came from the floorboards. Hesitantly, she stood, her breath shallow, and knelt by the fireplace. There, hidden beneath the soot and decay of the room, she saw it. A small, intricately carved box, its gold hinges worn by time. She hadn't noticed it before. It wasn't here last night. Lucy's hands trembled as she pried it open. Inside there were photographs, each one of her family gathered around a Christmas tree that seemed too large, too grand for the house. Their faces were so familiar, yet wrong. Their smiles were wide, but there was something off about them, too sharp, too knowing. And those eyes, too hollow, too hungry. But then, as she turned the last photograph over, her breath caught in her throat. There, scribbled in her mother's handwriting, the words chilled her to the bone. The ritual is complete. No more secrets. Her mind screamed as the fire suddenly flared higher, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The temperature in the room plummeted. The air felt thick, suffocating, as though something ancient had awoken in the house. Lucy spun, her heart pounding. Behind her, in the reflection of the glass in the fireplace, she saw it, a figure, her own face staring back at her. But the reflection wasn't hers, it was twisted. Her eyes were black pits, her lips curled into a grotesque, impossibly wide grin. The figure in the mirror moved as if it were alive, its grin stretching further, wider, until it split open her face. She felt her own mouth contort involuntarily, a scream trapped inside, her body rigid, unable to move. And then, from the shadows came a low, guttural whisper like the scraping of old bones. "Lucy, you were always meant to join us. The ritual is complete." Suddenly the fire roared to life, the heat unbearable. The walls seemed to close in on her as the house began to groan, its wooden bones creaking, screaming in agony. Her family's twisted laughter echoed in the house, too many voices, all too loud, reverberating in her skull. They were there, behind the walls, and they were waiting. Lucy wasn't alone. And now the family secret had claimed her. John had never quite understood the strange legacy left to him. His grandfather, a man of silence and strange rituals, had raised him alone in a house that seemed to pulse with something beyond time. The mansion, perched on the edge of town, was full of darkness. Thick, heavy curtains shut out the daylight, leaving only the faint flicker of candlelight to guide John through the maze of rooms. The air always smelled of dust and something darker, a tang of old blood that seemed to settle in the corners of every room. It was Christmas Eve when John, now alone, found himself seated by the fire. The flames flickered weakly, casting long, hungry shadows that seemed to stretch toward him. The house felt colder tonight. It felt as though something was watching him, waiting. His grandfather had always told him strange things, things that John had never believed. The family keeps a dark promise. On Christmas Eve, it's time to pay your dues. He had dismissed it, chalking it up to madness, but tonight there was something in the air that made him remember those words. John's hand brushed across the old wooden table when he felt something. Cold, smooth. He looked down. There, sitting in the center of the table, was a small box. It hadn't been there before. He slowly opened it, his heart pounding. Inside was a letter, its edges yellowed with age. His grandfather's handwriting bled through the paper. If you're reading this, then you are the last one. The ritual cannot be undone. Every Christmas Eve, we must make our choice. You must fulfill the legacy. Blood for blood, heart for heart. John's eyes blurred as the words swam before him. What did this mean? What legacy? Suddenly, a cold gust of wind slammed the door open and John froze, his breath caught in his throat. Outside, standing in the snow, was his grandfather, his eyes hollow, his flesh decayed, hanging in tatters. A grotesque smile stretched across his face, too wide, too far, like it didn't belong there. The shadows in the house began to twist and writhe, taking on monstrous shapes. Something moved in the corner of his vision, and when he looked back, his grandfather was no longer standing outside. He was in the room. The air turned ice cold as John backed away, his feet slipping on the floor. The figure of his grandfather reached toward him, the skeletal hand groping for his throat, pulling him closer. It's your turn now, John. The legacy demands your sacrifice. John's fate was sealed the moment he inherited the house. The legacy had claimed him, just as it had claimed every family member before him. Elena lived alone in a cramped apartment, one that felt smaller every time she walked through it. Christmas had never meant much to her. As a child, her family had been fractured, and after years of quiet isolation, she had grown accustomed to the silence of her life. Her tiny tree, decorated with a few cheap ornaments, stood in the corner of the room. Its dim lights blinked, casting eerie, sporadic shadows across the walls. The apartment felt almost suffocating, too still, too silent. Tonight she had plans for peace, for a moment of respite from the memories of a life lived in shadows. But as midnight drew near, an unease began to settle over her. The air felt wrong, heavy, almost oppressive. And then the knock came. Knock, knock. Elena froze. No one visited her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly she approached the door, her pulse pounding in her ears. Hesitantly she opened it. There, lying on the doorstep, was a small wooden box. It was beautifully carved, its surface smooth and cold to the touch. The box seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, a hum that vibrated through her fingers as she picked it up. She opened it slowly, her heartbeat in her throat. Inside, nestled carefully, was a single ornament, a glass ball. It shimmered in the dim light, showing a family gathered around a Christmas tree, their faces glowing with warmth. But something about them seemed wrong. The smiles were too wide, their eyes too bright, too knowing. As Elena stared, the faces in the glass began to change. The smiles turned into snarls, the eyes black and empty. The warm glow of the ornament faded into a cold, lifeless light. She felt her stomach churn as the image inside twisted, the family now contorted in pain, their faces warped in grotesque agony. Suddenly the glass shattered, the shards flying in every direction. From the pieces, a skeletal hand shot out, grabbing Elena by the wrist. She screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the suffocating silence. Her body froze, her limbs numb with terror. As she tried to break free, a cold voice, distorted and unrecognizable, whispered from the dark corners of her apartment. "You never forgot, did you? The family always returns on Christmas Eve, and now, so will you." The door slammed shut behind her, and she was dragged into the darkness. Elena had never been truly alone, and Christmas Eve had come to claim her, just as it had claimed every soul before her. The family would never let her go. Family, it binds us, it consumes us, and some ties are too strong to break. This Christmas Eve, remember? Some secrets are buried for a reason, and some families, no matter how far we run, will always find a way to claim us. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the darkest corners of terror. Until next time, stay safe, stay silent, for you never know when the shadows will return, or who will be waiting in the dark. Subscribe to Mr. Terror Tales, like and share our channel. If you like sent to Mr. Terror's Tale, email your unique horror story to make it video. Thank you for watching.